Hey guys, this is Clinton Jeff from UnleashThePhones.com and here's my review of the LG G3. Now if you've seen my review of the LG G2 from last year, it was a pretty good phone and the first phone from LG that I really liked. With the LG G3 we have pretty much the same story again, except that they've improved on the same things that I liked about the LG G2. You have the same slim bezels around the screen, the same rear mounted keys and some very clever software tweaks, as well as their first Quad HD display. That's impressive, that's insane. I've been saying for a while now that you don't really need a screen higher than 1080p resolution, but LG decided to plonk in an even higher resolution screen anyway, and here you go. This is the first Quad HD resolution phone that I'm reviewing. Starting with design, the LG G3 looks very similar to the LG G2. It's the same overall appearance and form factor, but the G3 has improved on the design with a nice little curved back, as you can see, which makes it a lot easier to hold and use the somewhat large 146 by 74 by 8.9mm phone. That huge size is mostly because of that huge screen, which makes the G3 a bit larger than its rivals at this price point. For example, the HTC One M8 is just as tall but slightly narrow, while the Galaxy S5 is narrow and shorter. The G3 is even larger than the G2, which itself had a 5.2-inch display. That being said, thanks to the incredibly slim bezels around the display, the G3 doesn't actually feel much larger in daily usage compared to its rivals. And it only weighs 149 grams, which isn't too bad at all. But hey, let's talk about the display now that we mentioned it. The LG G3 features an enormous 5.5-inch display that's much larger than what you get with the competition. In fact, the only thing that comes close is the Xperia Z2's 5.2-inch display. But the 0.3 inches of the G3 really does make a huge difference, and the slimmer bezels really make it a much better experience overall. But hey, there's more to the G3's display than just being huge. Yep, that 5.5-inch IPS LCD panel also happens to be the first 1440 by 2560 pixel resolution, aka QHD display on a globally available smartphone with a mind-boggling pixel density of 538 ppi. As a result of that incredibly high pixel density, everything on the screen looks extremely sharp without even the slightest hint of pixelization anywhere. Now I know that's the same thing I said when I first reviewed the HTC Butterfly, which was the first 1080p resolution display on a smartphone, but that statement is still true, but even more accurate with a QHD display. But how much of an advantage does QHD resolution bring over a 1080p resolution display? There's definitely a difference in clarity, but it's a little hard to notice. In fact, you'll definitely notice that the screen pops and everything looks super fine and clear, but it really doesn't seem to have any benefit or look any more cleaner compared to a 1080p display. Not to mention that a higher resolution display also means that processor has to push a lot more pixels, which puts the G3 at a bit of a benchmark disadvantage versus its rivals, which kind of makes me wonder whether the jump in resolution was worth it. But hey, it is a beautiful display regardless, though it can't get as bright as the HTC One M8's display, but it's much brighter than the Galaxy S5. It's also easy enough to use outdoors in bright sunlight. Apart from that, color reproduction is pretty good, though the screen can be a little saturated and makes everything look more pleasant, as you can see. If you're a screen purist, you might be disappointed that there's no natural screen mode present. Moving on from the screen, as hard as it is to, the G3 also has the same signature short-ish top bezel like the G2, with a more pronounced bottom bezel below the screen. Above the screen, you'll see just a centrally located earpiece and a front-facing 2.1 megapixel camera that does a pretty okay job. There's also a proximity sensor and ambient light sensor. Now below the screen, you will see no buttons at all because it uses on-screen navigation buttons. Instead, you just see the LG branding on a very pronounced bottom bezel. The color of the bezel that's below the screen matches the color of the phone you've bought. The gray unit that we have has a gray bottom bezel, so if you get a gold LG G3 or a white LG G3, this will be that respective color. Personally, I feel like the gray unit looks a lot more classier and elegant overall. Alright, moving on to buttons and keys. At the top of the LG G3, you'll find just the infrared port right over there, nothing else. You also find a secondary noise cancellation microphone over there. At the bottom, you'll find the micro USB charging port, the 3.5mm audio jack, and the hole for the main microphone. There's no buttons at the sides, making the phone look a lot more cleaner than its rivals. Instead, all the buttons are at the back. Now, just talking about the back of the LG G3, you'll find a lot of smooth polycarbonate all around, which makes the removable back panel of this phone. According to LG, see there's a matte anti-fingerprint finish on top, which keeps the back free of smudges and fingerprints, but there's also a very tiny film of metal in the back cover, which makes it more than your usual plastic back cover. The result is something that looks very similar to the brushed metal of the HTC One M8, but also means that the phone isn't as slippery, and the matte finish means that you won't have to keep wiping down this phone to keep looking clean. Apart from that, there's the LG branding right in the center, a tiny little grill for the very loud loudspeaker that I'll talk about later on, and you have this little module over here which has the laser focus, the OIS camera, and the rear mounted buttons, as long as a dual LED flash. Now, when I first encountered the rear keys on the LG G2, it took me a little while to get used to them, maybe a couple of days, but I was immediately used to them on the G3 because I have used the G2 before it. The rear button placement doesn't really come off as anything better than your usual side button placement, but the real advantage of having the buttons at the back means that LG could keep the bezels very slim because there are no volume controls or any buttons at the side, which I think is a worthy trade-off, all things considering. The back buttons are okay to use and you'll get used to them after a couple hours of usage. There's the center power and screen lock button right there, which has a decent amount of tactile feedback, though I do feel like the volume controls could have had better feedback, maybe be a little bit more raised than they are. Unlike the G2, there's also no notification light at the back, which is strange because it really came in handy on the G2. Taking off the back panel is a bit of a task because it is really hard to get off, but you can just clip it off right there at the side and pull it off. Okay, taking off the back panel shows you the removable 3000 mAh battery. You have a micro SIM card slot over here and a micro SD card slot above it. All in all, the LG G3 has a pretty good, dare I say, futuristic design. It might not catch many envious glances from people passing by, but at least it's different enough that it stands out compared to what else you get out there. Coming to hardware, the LG G3 is powered by a Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 processor, just like many other globally available flagship smartphones. The G3 uses a slightly more powerful version of the Snapdragon 801, which is 2.5 GHz quad-core with an Adreno 330 GPU, with about 2 or 3 GB of RAM, depending whether you get the 16 GB or 32 GB variant. This is the 16 GB variant that we're reviewing, just so you know, which means it has 2 GB of RAM. As a result, the LG G3 is pretty powerful, but the high QHD resolution means it isn't exactly as smooth as the experience as its rivals. For example, if you're opening up an app, it does take a second to load. There's also a little bit of lag every so often that you just saw when you're scrolling around. You'll definitely notice some choppiness in the UI. It could also be possibly down to bad software optimizations, but I'm assuming it's more about that processor pushing many more pixels compared to the 1080p resolution that the rivals are on. Now, that being said, it's not terrible, but you will see some hints of slowdowns every so often when you browse through the menu or when you open up or close an app. Honestly, it doesn't really lag any more than the Galaxy S5, to be very honest, and you'll only notice it if you put it up against the HTC One M8, for example. As a result, it's not a big surprise to see that benchmark results of the LG G3 aren't as great as its rivals, showing that the QHD resolution does take a toll on the chipset. We have benchmark scores and pictures over on the blog that you can check out for a better idea of them. I should stress to say though that the G3 isn't slow at all. In fact, it's actually kind of fast. It's just that the insane amount of pixels being pushed by the processor is limiting performance to below rival flagship levels. Moving on for performance, like I said, you get the LG G3 in both 16 GB and 32 GB versions, and they both have a micro SD card slot at the back. In terms of connectivity, there's the usual Bluetooth 4.0, Wi-Fi, NFC, DLNA, and a slim port instead of MHL. The G3 also comes in both 3G and LTE versions depending on which region you're picking it up from. Alright, coming to software, the LG G3 runs Android 4.4.2 KitKat out of the box with LG's redesigned skin all over it. As you can tell from just the menus and the general UI has been completely redesigned and is completely different from what we've seen before with the LG G2, for example. The entire UI is now much nicer, much cleaner all around, and it's a huge refresh compared to what we saw in the G2. LG has really never been great at software design, but they've done a surprisingly good job with the new UI. They've also kind of copied HTC's idea of having a set color scheme or highlight color to certain apps. Even the gallery app has been redesigned and looks really nice right now, and you can see that the highlight color changes for that as well. All in all, it looks really nice, and generally the UI looks a lot more mature now and very clean and comfortable to use. They've also managed to preserve all the functionality that you'd expect from a flagship phone. In this day and age, you have the usual things like the double tap to lock and double tap to unlock, just like on the G2. You have the usual lock screen. You can also change the animation that you get when you unlock. There's a whole bunch of settings that you can tweak. For example, you can choose the lock screen effect to unlock it. You can select the screen lock, like LG's knock code, which allows you to just to tap a certain pattern even if the screen is off to unlock the phone. There's a whole bunch of things, like for example, you can edit the home touch buttons. Now by default you have 3 navigation buttons at the bottom, but you can see I've added this 4th one over here, which is a drop down, so I don't have to stretch my finger all the way up to bring the notification shade down. But you can also add another one. For example, you can add quick memo right over here, or you can remove that and put Q slide or dual window, or any of these little shortcuts right here to make it easier to use your G3. We've seen Q memo and Q slide before, but there's a new feature called dual window right now. Dual window allows you to open up 2 apps side by side, or one below each other rather. For example, here I have Chrome and Google Maps running side by side. You can also use that little bar to adjust how much of the screen you want to allocate to which app. It generally works pretty well, as you can see, no complaints as such, but there's only a certain number of apps that you can run in this mode. Being an LG phone, you can also customize a lot more things about this phone. For example, you can customize the multitasking view. You can have a 6x6 grid, or you can pinch out and have a 4x4 grid, or pinch out again and just have 2 app thumbnails being shown at the same time where you swipe to close them. You can also of course choose which shortcuts appear over here right by hitting the edit button. So really a lot of things are customizable. There's also a new feature called Smart Notice, which kind of acts like LG's version of Google Now. It'll inform you about the weather and tell you to carry an umbrella maybe. It'll also for example tell you to call somebody back in case you missed a call from somebody, and well, it's pretty okay. It's not really that useful. I still prefer Google Now, which is just a swipe away. Apart from that, you have the usual phone book and the same dialer as you'd expect. There's also a really nice messaging app right now that has been completely redesigned. LG also has this new keyboard here called a smart keyboard, which is supposed to adapt to your writing style, but also has swipe to type, as you can see, which works pretty well. You still kind of need both thumbs to type, but you can kind of type one-handed comfortably using the swipe to type gesture. I would personally still install a third-party keyboard like Swipe, but LG Smart Keyboard is also pretty okay. You can also customize the keyboard by going to the settings where you can adjust the height and layout. You can also select a keyboard theme in case you want a black theme instead of a white theme that's being displayed right now. You can also choose the bottom row keys. You can split a keyboard in case you want, and there's also a one-handed operation. Moving on to multimedia, as you can probably imagine, the 5.5-inch QHD display is great to watch videos on. It's also great to look at pictures on, and I have no complaints at all. Moving on to music, the LG G3's music player is pretty well organized and visually kind of okay. It displays album art in a very simplistic, clean looking style, as you can see. The loudspeaker though is really loud, and I'm not gonna play it to show you how loud it is, but it's very comparable to the HTC One M8 speaker, even though that's a stereo speaker and this is mono. So the audio of the loudspeaker might not be as clean as the M8, but it definitely is pretty loud. So that's pretty much it for the software. Coming to the camera, usually with a new smartphone, most manufacturers would up the megapixels in the camera. Instead, LG has chosen to stick with the 13 megapixel camera that they also used on the G2, which is more than enough to get very detailed, good looking pictures. The 13 megapixel on the G3 is similar to the one in the G2 in terms of specs. There's the same 1x3.06 inch sensor, which is pretty much the same size as the one on the iPhone 5s and the HTC One M8. The G3's camera is also an f2.3 lens and also has optical image stabilization, or OIS+. But the new thing that LG has thrown in here is the laser assisted autofocus. Now you can't actually make it out on camera, but there's a tiny beam of light that's being shot out from there. Yes, indeed, the G3 shoots out a laser beam that allows it to quickly and more accurately determine a distance towards any object that you're pointing the camera at, so it can focus as fast as possible. As a result, the G3 is extremely fast at focusing. Just so you know, the laser beam is really low intensity and certified to be eye safe so that it won't blind people that you're taking pictures of. The laser autofocus module emits pulses of low intensity infrared light through optics, and it waits for those rays to get refracted back and bounce back. As such, the module measures the travel times for each infrared pulse beam, which in turn gives an idea of how far away the subject is from the camera, and this all happens in a fraction of a second. Coming to the camera app, the UI is pretty simple, as you can see. There's just a viewfinder and these three dots. When it's in this mode, you can basically just tap to take a picture, and it does that very fast. If you want more options though, you can tap those three buttons, which gives you access to different modes that you can choose from, such as magic focus, where you can take a picture and then focus later, a panorama mode, and a dual capture mode, which is pretty popular on most flagship phones nowadays. There's also an HDR mode that you can turn on. You can also customize the megapixel setting that you want to capture video or images in. There's smile shutter, where you can just say cheese or smile to take a picture. As you can see, it works pretty well. There's also a timer and a grid. There's also toggles to switch between a front-facing camera and to turn the LED flash on or off. In terms of image quality, the LG G3's camera is right up there with some of the best phones right now. Colors generally look good, and results tend to look a bit warm, but sometimes a little bit too vibrant, as you can see in this picture. Still, images do look very realistic, and overall image quality is pretty well balanced, and details are pretty good outdoors. Coming indoors, you see camera quality take a slight hit, and the G3 opts for a slower shutter speed, which can cause some images to come a little bit blurry at night, but the onboard OIS Plus does greatly help in these circumstances. The front-facing 2.1 megapixel camera kind of lacks resolution and fidelity compared to the 5 megapixel front-facing camera that you see on the HTC One M8, for example, but it does use the display as a kind of flash at night to take better low-light selfies. We have a whole bunch of camera samples on the blog that you can check out for a better idea of how good the LG G3's camera is. Coming to video quality, the G3 can record up to 4K resolution video, of course. The 1080p resolution video is mostly good, but can be a little bit saturated, just like with images. 4K resolution quality is definitely a little bit better and more detailed, and the OIS Plus definitely helps attain a very smooth video footage. Alright, coming to call quality, the LG G3 has a pretty loud earpiece on top, which makes it pretty good for phone calls. Voices come in loud and natural, and folks on the other end of the call said that they could hear me very well. The loudspeaker on the G3 is also pretty loud, so you can very comfortably use that. Alright, coming to battery life, the LG G3 is powered by a 3000 mAh battery. That might sound like a lot, but then again, this phone has a QHD resolution display. As such, the G3's battery doesn't really last for as long as the HTC One M8's battery or the Xperia Z2. So that being said, battery life isn't too bad at all. It will definitely get you back home at the end of a moderate workday with some percentage left. LG rates the G3's battery at 21 hours of talk time on 3G and 23 days of standby, which sounds a little bit generous according to my usage. That being said, the G3 does charge up really quickly, and it also has built-in wireless charging support, so you can top it up with any Qi compatible wireless chargers. To conclude, the LG G3 is a fantastic phone, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. At this moment, it's the best spec phone out there in the market, and that's a huge achievement for LG. Looking at the G3, it's a surprisingly well-rounded phone in terms of design. It looks very stylish and has a great screen to body ratio. In terms of build quality, it's a mostly plastic phone, but LG has used much higher materials in its construction compared to something from Samsung. The 30 megapixel camera at the back is also really good. While it might not be the best camera phone out there, it can definitely compete with the likes of even Sony's Xperia Z2. Even the software UI has gotten a very nice minimalistic makeover, which is great because that was the only thing that annoyed me about the LG G2 last year. And even with the redesigned UI, LG has allowed almost every single thing to be customizable and has kept all the bells and whistles that you expect from a high-end Android phone. Honestly, the only thing I can find wrong with the LG G3 is that it's a rather large phone, and that's hardly saying anything at all. But even then, LG was extremely efficient with how they handle bezels, so the G3 doesn't really feel that hard to use at all in daily usage. As I mentioned earlier, the main reason for that huge size is that screen. The massive 5.5-inch QHD display means that the G3 is way more advanced, at least on this spec, compared to most of its rivals. As gorgeous as that insanely high resolution QHD display is though, I'm not really sure of its benefits, especially considering how a 1080p display would have improved performance just a bit more. That being said, it is a really nice display. Perhaps LG thought that a 1080p display on the G3 would make it too similar to the LG G2, which I still think is a great phone to get, especially now. That all being said, at the end of the day, I'm incredibly happy what LG has done with the G3. They've taken what I liked about the LG G2 and improved on it. The large size is a worthy trade-off for the fantastic screen, though performance purists might be annoyed at how those pixels mean slower performance compared to rival Android flagships. As such, it might not be the best Android phone in the world because it's not even waterproof like the Galaxy S5 and the Sony Xperia Z2, but it sure comes close to being the best Android phone in the world. It's certainly one of the best Android phones made so far. So if you do pick up an LG G3, you probably won't regret it at all. So that's what I think, guys. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below, or check out our detailed LG G3 review over at unleashthephones.com.